You've got questions, we've got answers. We have the man to answer them. Jeffrey Levine from Buckingham Wealth Partners. Jeffrey, welcome back to another episode of Ask the Hammer.
Hey, it is good to be with you as always, Bob.
Good to have you, Jeffrey. In my inbox, I have a question from a worker who has read from some experts that he should buy stock in his employer's competitors.
Well, that's a new one for you. I like that. That's kind of interesting. Well, you know what? If we think about this, I think I understand where that notion is coming from, right? Which is effectively diversification. If your employer hits it big, you got a job, right? And maybe you have some stock options in your employer if you're an executive or something along those lines. So that'll go well. But what if it doesn't, right? Then maybe you want this counterbalance here, which is your employer's competitors, because if your employer hasn't done well, maybe it's because your competitors have done a little bit better, right? So I kind of understand that. I think it's an interesting idea. If your portfolio is large enough, it might certainly be worth looking at. But one thing that strikes me is that if you are investing in your employer via your own labor, as well as potentially stock options, or maybe even an ESOP, right, an employee stock ownership plan, or within the 401k as part of net unrealized appreciation, if you have some sort of investment in your current employer, and then you're using other investments to purchase an interest in your employer's competitors, well, they're all part of the same industry, right? They're all part of the same sector. Maybe you get some geographic international diversification, perhaps, maybe, but certainly same industry. If it's your employer's competitors, they're competing against you. It's the same type of business. And so if your portfolio is big enough where you can have enough diversification elsewhere to say, all right, I want to have kind of this micro diversification just in this one sector. All right, I can understand that. But if not, let's say your employer happens to be a large cap stock or a small, you may want to focus on diversification in other areas first, such as diversifying to, if it's an employer stock, having fixed income, having real estate as part of your portfolio. Then if your employer is a large employer, maybe you want the stock of smaller employers, or at least large employers in other sectors, right? So I totally understand where that line of thought comes from. And I think there's some validity to it. But for most people, as they're building their portfolio, there's probably bigger diversification benefits from investing elsewhere, as opposed to focusing narrowly on your employer's competitors.
Yeah. I'm fond of that saying about not putting all your eggs in one basket. This would be putting all your eggs and then some in one basket if you were to have stock in your company and your competitor's company.
100%, right? It's like a very, very narrow sector. And I actually, so rarely do you and I disagree, Bob. This is one area where you and I disagree. So you said, you're fond of that expression, don't put all your eggs in one basket. I actually really dislike that expression because I think it doesn't really tell the story of what we're trying to do with diversification. Because I want you to imagine a scenario here, Bob. I want you to imagine one day you needed to bring eggs to dear old grandma. And so what do? You go buy a dozen eggs and you put them all in one basket. And then you walked outside and it was very slippery. It was an icy day out. And you slip and you fall. Your one basket full of 12 eggs falls with you. How many broken eggs do we have?
Quite a few. Dozen?
Probably a dozen broken eggs. Sure. Now, let's put our eggs in different baskets. Instead of this, you went to the store and you bought a dozen eggs and you bought 12 baskets. And you put one egg in each basket. And as you were getting to go to grandma's house, you went to the kitchen and I broke my basket. You went to the kitchen and you grabbed up all 12 baskets and you walked outside with your 12. Now, everything is in a different basket, but you walked outside with your 12 baskets, slipped on the same piece of ice and fell. How many broken eggs do you have?
Well, I'm going to say 11 because one fell on me and didn't break.
All right. Well, maybe you got a little bit of diversification there. Probably not what you were going for. But if you called your 11 closest friends, Bob, and said, I've got a dozen eggs, each in their own basket, everybody take a basket, and you went outside and fell. After your friends stopped laughing at you because you fell, they would walk around the ice and they would save the other 11 eggs. And so when we're talking about diversification, it's not just eggs in different baskets, because sometimes people just rapid fire, I've got a lot of stuff. Well, having a lot of stuff doesn't make you diversified. Having investments that perform differently, that aren't dependent. The technical term here is they're not correlated to one another. There's a high degree of correlation that if you're holding 12 baskets and one egg breaks, that the other 11 eggs will probably break as well. But if you had 11 other people who are holding those baskets, then you truly have diversification. You've got different things that will act differently and aren't dependent upon one another. And that is where true diversification comes in.
All right. Well, I know I have egg on my face at the moment, maybe even
well,
12 eggs.
well done, Bob. Well done. I like it. Excellent.
But I do have a follow-up because it begs this question, which is to think about diversification means the science of it means I have to think about uncorrelated assets. And for average investors, the thought of finding or discovering uncorrelated assets is no easy challenge.
Look, even for professionals, the idea of finding uncorrelated assets can be difficult. In fact, if we go back to the crash of 08 and 09, what a major part of that crash was is correlations going to one, which effectively means everything acted the same. It wasn't just stocks had a bad year, real estate had a bad year, bonds had everything had it was like Oprah looking under the seat and saying, you had a bad year, everybody gets a bad year. That was what happened back in 2008 and 9. So it's even difficult for financial professionals. But yes, if you're on your own, it is certainly more difficult to find that true diversification, to aim for what financial professionals call the efficient frontier, which is trying to maximize the given level of return for a given level of risk. It's very challenging. I agree.
Jeffrey answered the first question and then multiple questions after that. So thanks.
Well, this was a fun one, and we'd love to increase our basket of questions. So if you've got one, send Bob and I a shout. Send us an email. Send a message to askthehammer@buckinghamgroup.com. Again, that's askthehammer@buckinghamgroup.com. And Bob and I look forward to tackling your question real soon.